Hey everybody, welcome back to Frank's Homestead. This is part 2 of building an outdoor space. If you watched the first one, you know behind me there is vertical supports for the whole outdoor space. Got the floor in rough graded, and since the last video I actually put a little bit of gravel around the outside edge of it. But this video, part 2, is all about the roof and putting it on. So with that being said, I'm going to quit yakking and get down to work. So what the plan is, back here between that post and that post, I'll put a post across it. It'll be notched in to sit down so it's level. And then I'll do the same thing to the front 2 posts. Then I'll get my logs and I'll run them this way between these posts down each side. The logs that'll be going this way will be notched so that they match the curve of the log going this way. Once that's done, then in the center of each post, right in this area, I'll go with the vertical post, only about 1.5 to 2 feet tall. It'll be notched to fit this log and the log that will go right down the center. Once that's done, then I'll put on the rafters and everything that goes with that, including the tin. So I cut this log extra long, just make sure I had plenty to work with. So I'll measure it, and then I'll center it on the vertical post, and then I'll mark it for cutting. I also have to measure each end and see what the difference is. So if this end here is 6 inches, but that end down there is 5 inches, then what I need to do is make this cut down here just a little deeper, 1 inch deeper, so that way that post will be flat on top. Okay, so what I did is I put a mark where we're sitting up there on the log, there and there. But if you look down the log, which may be hard to tell, it's got a bit of a bow to it. I want to make sure that crown is facing up when I put this in place. So both ends of that log are almost identical in the diameter. And all I want to do is notch it down about 1 inch. I want to leave most of the meat on the log, but that'll give it a big enough seat to sit on the log properly, the vertical post. So I'm going to take my tape measure, put it on a tooth, and I'm going to mark it with my pencil. So that way I know how far and how deep to cut. The trick's going to be to try and keep it flat. Now I'll do the same thing to the other side. Now that the log is notched and in place, I'll center it up on the vertical post. I'll drill a hole through the top, and then I'll pound a spike through it. Now I'll do the same to the other side. Now I'll mark it just like the other log, pull it down, notch it, put it back up, drill a hole after centering it up, and then pound in a spike. So once again, this log also has a crown on it. So I've rolled it so that the crown is facing down. That way when I notch, it'll be facing up when I put it into place. Once I get the center log on there, it'll help flatten that out as it dries out as well. Now that I got my first beam up, I'll center it on top of the 2 vertical posts. Now I got that log in place. It got a compass. It's one you'd have for a kid in grade school. And I modified it with a Sharpie so it'll show up on a log. Now I'm going to scribe around these logs so it'll fit the log underneath it. So just like the other posts, I'll drill a hole and I'll put a spike in it. And it's pretty obvious to me that I am rusty on the old scribing. So hopefully the next couple logs look a lot better than that. Well, I got rained out again. Okay, so it's day 5 of the build, and so I've got my center log kind of sitting roughly where it's going to go, but I need to take measurements to find the exact center on both ends. So what I've got here is 2 logs, and these will be cut at an angle like this and like this. This will be the top log. They'll have a little notch in it so that center log up there will sit in that. And this is how I'm gonna do it. So how I'm gonna make my cuts is I'm gonna mark each log in the center. I'm gonna line them up, which I've already done. And then I'm gonna measure off of that from the top log here. I'm gonna measure over until I get enough space that'll be left on top. Has to be at least 8 inches to work with to cut the groove for the top post. Once I've got it where I want it, I'll mark it with my pencil. Then I'm also gonna screw it down. I'll use this board as a guide for my chainsaw. I'll do the same thing to the other side. So next step now is to take that longer piece that I just cut. I'm going to set it up on top of that log and screw it in at each end. That way it'll stay in place while I scribe it. Now that it's scribed, I can take that section of log off and cut out where I scribed. Now it's down on the ground. It's kind of hard to see, but I have a mark on each side. I'll cut it into a V, and that way when I put it back up, it'll sit right on top of that log. And then I can screw it into place. Looks like it's gonna be close enough for government work. So now I'm gonna secure that with 6-inch torque bit screws. Now I'll do the same thing to the shorter piece that'll sit on top of it. Now for the back horizontal log, I'll repeat everything that you've just seen to match it up in the back. Okay, so now you can see in the background, got my center post up on top of those logs, and that end down there has 2 wedges that'll help keep that log in place. There's 2 different measurements that are gonna have to happen here in order to get that center beam level. And one of them is the height of this end compared to the other end and the diameter of that top log. So I've got to do a bunch of measurements to figure out how much I will have to scribe and take out. So on this last center beam, it's not going to get notched this time. The top of that second log up there is where it's going to get notched. It'll get a little dip carved into it where that top beam, center beam, will lay into it. So now that I've measured both ends of that center beam, found out that it is 2 inches higher at this end than it is at the other end. So I've got 19¼ inches here, 17¼ inches down there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut about a 1/2 inch dip in that back support. Then up here I will scribe it to 2½ inches. I'll add that extra 1/2 inch to compensate, and that should make my center beam level. Well, it ain't perfect, but for this little homestead, it's gonna work out just fine. Okay, I've got those secured, and actually what I decided to do, instead of using spikes, I put my big 6-inch hex screws in it. And the reason is because over time, the top log will split potentially, and I didn't want to have that as a problematic down the road. So that's what I ended up doing instead, changing it. So now what I'm going to do is go find a bunch of smaller logs and peel them, and I'll put braces here and there, and I'll do that on each corner. So I'll need 8 of those, and then I'll also do one on each end of this from there down to there, give it support. So off to the woods I go to get more small trees. And I'll tell you what, we've had cooler weather all week, and this morning looked outside and there was even frost. And now it is hot and muggy, and it is almost unbearable to work out here in this sun. But at least we get to go to the forest and get some logs, give us a little shade. So now that I got some smaller logs peeled, now I'm going to cut some 45s on them and start fitting them into the corners. And then finally the last angle piece is going in. The next phase of this is going to be pressure washing all these timbers. Well, now it's all pressure washed, we'll let it dry overnight, and then tomorrow start on the roof. Today is all about getting all the materials cut to do this roof. So I'm going to use 2x6s every 2 foot on center. So I'm going to need 10 per side for a total of 20 2x6s. And so that's what I'm going to start with first. I'm going to take inventory of what I got cut. I ended up with about 14 that are done. So I'm going to have to cut a few more. Okay, now that I've got all of my materials cut, now I got to figure out what my angle is. I'm going to show you an easy way of doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my level, I'm going to center it on that log, and then make sure that it's standing up straight, and I'm going to draw a line. Now I'm going to have to check the angle on every single one because the log is not perfectly flat, nor is it the same diameter, so I need to check each one as I go along. Now I'll just cut with the saw on that line that I made, and I'll put it back up. Now simply just put that board back up, put the other board right behind it, and make a mark on that angle. And that's what the cut will look like once they're put together. So now I'll screw these two together at the top, and then I'll move it into position where I want it. Then I have to square it up, make sure it's straight up and down from the peak. I'll show you what I mean in the next step. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor it up here at the top with the approximate reveal of the log that I want. So this first set of roof trusses here is critical because I'm going to use it to set the rest of them down the road. Okay, I've got a screw up there, and I did the same thing over on that end. And then I've also got one up in the center as close to the log pole as possible. What I'm going to do is run my string line from this screw here all the way over, run it tight, and then from the center screw I'm going to run a plumb bob. That way it will point to the string and I can square it up that way. Now I couldn't find my plumb bob, so I made a makeshift one. I just took a drill bit. It's got kind of a square end on it, so that way I have two sides that are flat to work with. I took some string, tied it so it lays on each side of that bit end. That'll keep it centered. It's got a point on it, and for these purposes it's going to be close enough. Now I can move the trusses so that they're in line with each other. And that's what it looks like. So now I can move the ends down here, either that one or the one behind me, so that way this string line is directly underneath the point of that drill bit. Then I'll have this in a straight line. So I've gotten it straightened up. Now it's in line from the peak to the ends. I'm going to use this type of strong tie to connect it to the outer post. Now I'll use that first roof truss to set the standard for the rest of the trusses. I'll measure off of it to get my distance, which will be 2 foot on center between each 2x6. I'll do that through the whole length of the structure. Now that I got my roof trusses up, before I do anything else, I need to take a string line from the back end to the front end, make sure that the peak is all in line. Once I've got the one side done, now I'll go down the center, and then I'll finish up by doing the other side. Now the roof trusses are secured. Next what I'm going to do is cut the eaves. I've got to square them up. So what I'll do is I'll run a tape measure from the peak down to where I want it, right in this area here, which I'm looking around 10 feet. I'll do it on this first one, and I'll do it on the last one down there. And then I'll run a string line between them so that they're straight. Then I'll mark them and cut them off. Then I'll go and I'll do the same thing the other side. So today is the last day of building the roof, and for the occasion I've got on a cleaner gray shirt, and now I'm sporting the shorts. Anyway, it's too hot the last couple days. So today all I'm going to be doing is running my boards across here on each side and then putting the tin on. So we should be able to wrap this up today. Okay, so one thing I've done is I ran a string line at the end down there over to the front of the structure, and as you can see, got a gap there. Now if I put it just down onto that one, the rest of them look pretty darn good. Variance of a 1/4 inch maybe at the most. I can work with that. What the problem is that this log right here, if you look at it from the side, it's a little hard to tell, but it kind of goes up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to notch. I'm going to figure out what the difference is by measurement, and I'll notch this log out to accommodate and get this truss down to the same level as the others. Okay, well that was better than the alternative, which was to fix all the other ones. So a little bit of notching, got her in there, and now she's right where she needs to be. Pulled enough 2x4s, I think, for this side. We'll see how it staggers out. And I've got 5 boards up there on the top, and I'll start at the peak, measure down, and then every 2 foot on center, till the end at the eaves there. I'll be staggering the boards so that way they're not all lined up and stopping on the same board. Okay, so the first board is laid in place, and I'm going to be drilling each one, 2 screws in each one. I'll drill the boards first, that'll minimize cracking. And I'm going to give it about a 2-inch reveal here from the peak to the board. That way when I put the roof cap on, it will have something to anchor to really good down here. All right, now that I got half of this side done, you can see what I mean by the staggering. You know, that board goes that one and every other one, but that's just going to give it more structural integrity. So all the boards are up, really ties the structure all together, fortifies it. But other than cutting off the eaves here, making them straight, it's ready for tin. I think I'm going to put this side on first, that way I'll have a little shade out here when I need it. So I've got all this tin. It took me about 2 hours to salvage all this. The thing I like about it, it's got a little bit older look to it because it is weathered, but at the same time it's still in good shape. So that's going to look nice on the outdoor space. Okay, so I've got myself a little pile to start with. I'm going to cut the pieces that are 7 foot 6 inches, and then I'm going to cut the pieces that are 3 foot, and that'll go from here to the edge, to the drip edge. So I'm not going to cut my eave here in front until I get this squared up. Because I know I plumbed this first truss up, what I'm going to do is down there at that end, I'm going to measure out and put the piece of metal where I want it. And I'll do the same at the top here. I'll put a screw on the outside of the metal, just temporarily hold it in place, and then I'll use my pencil to mark these boards. Then I'll cut them off before I proceed. Well, there's one side that's done. Me and Lori were talking about, we decided to put the rust on the inside. So it would look rustic. So moving on to the second side of this roof, I ran my string line. I'll do the same thing as I did to the other side of the roof, which is to find where the high spots are and notch into the log. Okay, I'm now done with all the slats on this other second side of the roof. Now it's time to start putting the metal on. All right, so I'm getting ready to put up my last 3 sheets. Got them all cut. I got my 8-foot ladder set as an exit strategy because I'm going to have to button it up while I'm up there. Then all I got to do is put that ridge cap on. So I've decided for my ridge cap, instead of going and spending money and buying it, I'm just going to make it out of a couple sheets of this tin. I know what my measurement is to cover the gap in the peak, and so now I just got to rip these down. So there you have it, folks. That's the end of part 2, how to build an outdoor space, putting on the roof. And I'm glad I'm done with the roof. Glad it's over. So make sure you come back and tune in for part 3, which is finishing off the outdoor space. Until then, thanks for watching. Hope that you subscribe and like this channel to help keep content coming down the road. Get off me, fly.